We're going to make 3 large jump rings, and then we're going to deform them. I think a 30 millimeter diameter, and we know that the diameter times pi will give us the length. So 30 times 3, we just do it roughly, is 90. So slightly larger, 100 millimeters long. And we're using 1.5 wire, because I think this is about the smallest diameter we can use and get a nice form. So this video is going to go on a lot of assumptions that you know how to do things I'm describing, so I'm not going to show you how to do them. File the ends flat. Anneal this if you can't bend it. If you can, just bend it around so that the ends match perfectly and solder it. When you're working with wire, you want the connections to be as close as possible because your eye always picks up deformities in the wire. So do as good a job on this as you can. And after you pickle it, round it up on either a large ring mandrel or a hoop mandrel. Because it's easier to form once you've rounded it up. So solder it, pickle it, round it up, and sand your join back. And anytime that we're doing soldering on a curved surface, always round it up before you sand it, because it's easier to sand on a curve than it is on a flat. Solder this together. Once you've got this soldered and rounded up, use your flat sanding stick and follow the curve when you're tidying up your solder. So that's the sides and the outside. And the inside, use your split mandrel with sandpaper on it. You can use a round piece of dowel, but it's just easier to use it this way. So don't linger in one spot, brush back and forth, because if you linger in one spot you'll wear grooves in it, and we just want to clean up the solder joint. We don't want to make it ugly. So once you have your shape like this, we're going to form it. And make sure that all of your sanding work and your join is done really well at this point, because it's easy to do it now, it's difficult to do it later. Now what we're going to do is take our flat round pliers to put an irregular shape in this. This will give us a rounded curve, and if you want square corners, we'll use our parallel jaw pliers. So for this one, let's just see how this works. Now, and this will be a severe test of our solder join. So grab your jump ring close to the largest part of the round part of your pliers, and we're going to just twist this. Yeah. To give us an irregular shape. You can just do it on one end if you want, or you can do it on both ends. Yeah, looks a bit like an amoeba, but that'll do. So the idea is to do 3 of these shapes for a necklace. So 3, you can do more if you want. And we'll link these with smaller jump rings. But what we're going to do next is make a cabochon setting that we're going to solder inside of this. We're using fine silver for our bezel wire. The height is 1/3 the height of the stone. Make sure you anneal this before you try to wrap it around the stone to get the size. 5 seconds flame on your fine silver is really all you need to anneal it. So we're just going to hold one end on the cabochon, and we're just going to wrap this around. Yeah, so wrap it around, mark it where it overlaps, cut it with sharp shears, check for fit, gently brush the file across the end just to flatten it out, and you can hold it in your fingers and just gently do this, because if you try to brace this against your bench peg, it'll just bend it. So when you get your end filed flat, put this on your charcoal block, hold it in your third hand, solder it, hard solder. So just mark your bezel with a fine texture. Cut it right on the line with your shears, sharp shears. Smooth that. Put the join together and solder it. Once you've soldered your bezel, check that it's a nice solder join. We want it lined up this way, because if it's slightly off on the inside and you push it over your stone, you'll be able to see it always. So make sure that that's a nice even join. Push it over the stone. It should be big enough that you can get your stone through. If you have to force it through, stretch it a little bit just by hammering it on a ring mandrel gently with a planishing hammer until it fits over the stone. Then when you push it over the stone, it'll give the shape you need, and it'll hold that shape. Now look on your bench plate and make sure that your bezel is flat, because we're going to put that on a piece of flat plate and solder it on. So it needs to fit perfectly. You can gently hammer it with a rawhide hammer, and gently is the appropriate word, because you'll flatten it if you hit it hard. So just make sure it sits nice and flat. If it doesn't, you can put a piece of sandpaper on your plate. So you can find one. Or on your bench, just nice and flat, and just scrub this, holding it with your fingers until it's nice and flat. Yeah, so once it's flat, position it on your plate. You can use anything from 0.5 up. I think we'll use 0.7 because that'll be plenty thick enough for what we want to do. So put your bezel on your plate, flux it all the way around, and place bits of solder inside. And what I do is I use about a 2 millimeter piece of solder, a 2 millimeter gap, 2 millimeter piece of solder, 2 millimeter gap all the way around. Heat this from the bottom on a tripod with a screen. So this is a tripod with just a screen. We'll put the piece on here and heat from underneath, because solder is always attracted to the heat, and if you heat this from the top, chances are the solder is going to jump up the edge of your bezel. So if you heat it from the bottom, the solder will flow quite nicely around the whole thing, and you won't have to worry about it. Once you get your bezel soldered onto the base, pickle it, have a really close look, and make sure that it's a really good solder join. Nothing more frustrating than trying to start setting the stone and having this lift off the base. So at this point, put your whatever it is, feature link down, put the stone in it, and just have a look at where it's going to go, because your bezel is going to be shaped exactly as the stone. So you can just sit this in and have a look. And for me, it seems to fit this curve quite nicely. It could fit there. And actually, if we put it there, we'll be able to solder the base at 3 different points, and that's good because that'll give us a lot of strength. If you just solder this at one point, one small point, it can break off quite easily. So now trim the base right up next to the bezel, and wherever it's going to sit on the wire, leave it just slightly proud so that there's a bit of a gap between your bezel and the wire. You can use the saw for this. Saw it to within about 1/2 millimeter of the bezel. And what you could do, if you wanted to, is you could use a little bit of the base to make a feature. So it doesn't have to be an exactly flat cut. What you could do is leave just a little bit of a curve coming out so that it gives you a little visual thing where it's soldered to the wire instead of just a plain solder joint. If you left a bit of a curve on this base, it would make a nice visual. Just an idea. Once you've trimmed the base, just hold it in your fingers, use your flat file, and follow the curve until you get it so that it just touches the bezel. Now, this is the point where you clean up your join of your bezel, not before. You can file that at the same time you're filing your base. And we want just a nice invisible join. Yep. So check it from time to time. Make sure the points that you want slightly proud are still there. You can just file this right to the bezel if you want, and then solder the base right to the wire if you don't want to mess with it.